morning, everybody. We are going to be starting a new chapter in history today on a new colony, the Carolinas, which today is separated into two different states. Do you know what they are? North and South Carolina. Very good. But at the time that we're studying, they were all grouped together. Here is where modern day North and South Carolina are. And according to your map, it's probably quite similar. But they were grouped together as one colony, the Carolinas, all together here. So let's hear about the Carolinas, which is going to get back into what we've been talking about recently with cash crops and plantations, and how they used a lot of indentured servants that came over from England and then started using enslaved workers, sadly, and that were a lot of them coming over from Africa. So that is a huge part of Carolina's history, both North and South Carolina, as they were all grouped together. So we'll get into that in chapter 7. Okay, so I'll present over to our book so you can read along with me. So plantations in South Carolina. A Charleston sea captain. It is the year 1710. Eliza and her father are having breakfast at home. Her father, Edward Jones, is a sea captain. Their house overlooks Charleston Harbor in the Carolina colony. Now, Captain Jones leaves tomorrow on a long sea voyage. His ships will sail to the West Indies, England, and Africa before returning to Charleston. While her father is at sea, Eliza will live with her uncle, Joseph Jones. He owns 2 plantations and a house in Charleston. Now, the port of Charleston lies near the mouths of the Ashley and Cooper rivers. These 2 rivers connect Charleston to the large plantations inland. From Charleston's harbor, ships can trade with the whole world, which is right down here, pretty far south, Charleston. Now, in 1710, when Eliza's story takes place, Charleston was the only large town in Carolina colony. In 1663, about 30 years after the Maryland colony began, King Charles II of England gave a group of rich English gentlemen another colony in North America. In honor of King Charles, the gentleman named the colony Carolina. Now, Carolina comes from the word Carolus or Carolus, which is Latin for Charles. And as you can think of Charleston also obviously being like Charlestown. Now, wealthy gentlemen started plantations in Carolina to make money by growing cash crops. Tobacco would not grow in the area around Charleston. As we've seen, tobacco was very common as a cash crop that was being sold off. It only worked to make money if they did have huge amounts of it that they were sending off, though. But Carolina planters discovered they couldn't do tobacco, but they could grow and sell other crops for lots of money. These crops were rice and indigo. And actually, rice mainly grows in Arkansas now. Arkansas has more rice farms and produces more rice than any other state in their country. I think actually in all of North America even. So, and indigo as well. Now, indigo is a plant from which a blue-green dye is made. A woman by the name of Eliza Lucas was mainly responsible for making indigo a very successful cash crop. Now, selling these cash crops made some Carolina planters very rich. Like plantation owners in Virginia and Maryland, they began to use enslaved workers, though. So they were desperate to be able to make a little bit of money, and then it got out of hand, and they stopped using just the indentured servants, which was fine because they were able to be free and they weren't owned. Then they started using these enslaved workers that did not have rights and were treated very badly. Now, after breakfast, Eliza and her father go to the dock. Captain Jones looks over his 2 ships. The first ship, called the Seahawk, will soon sail for the West Indies. It's filled with lumber and cattle for plantations there. The second ship, the Raven, will sail for England. It will carry a cargo of tobacco, indigo, and rice. In England, the captain will deliver the ship's cargo and buy English goods. So this is going along with the triangular trade routes that we talked about. Just that? Oh, that's good. Sorry, it takes a long time. It's finicky to switch the maps, but they're trading things back and forth between Europe and the Americas. America, specifically the 13 colonies in North America, were sending out supplies like this tobacco, indigo, and rice, and England would buy that. And then there were certain things that they wanted to buy from England. So it was just a trading at first. Now, the Raven then would sail to Africa. There, Captain Edward would trade English goods for enslaved workers. Finally, the Raven would sail back to Charleston with those enslaved workers. Now, Eliza watches as the sailors load cattle and lumber onto the Seahawk. On the Raven, workers roll huge barrels of rice up the loading ramp and onto the deck. When the Raven reaches Africa, the ship will take enslaved Africans on board. The trip across the Atlantic Ocean, called the Middle Passage, going back and forth between Africa and North America, was brutal. The enslaved Africans must stay in cramped, dirty quarters beneath the deck of the ship. And this was a month-long journey. And so they basically were put in places where they didn't think of like them being people that needed space to move and breathe. And once again, this is for months. They need to be able to sleep comfortably if possible and not get sick. But that's not what they were thinking about. When the Raven returns to Charleston, the enslaved workers will be sold mostly to plantation owners. So they were chained up. They had not done anything wrong. They weren't prisoners, but it was making it seem like they were prisoners, or even treating them worse than prisoners. So enslaved Africans, as you can see here, were transported from Africa to North America. They were packed onto ships really tightly and sailed thousands of miles and barely moved. Wouldn't that be terrible? Now, here's an example of what it could have been like on a plantation. Now, after a while, a large black carriage pulled by 4 horses rolls up to the dock. Uncle Joseph and his children appear. Eliza is happy to see her cousins. They travel to Uncle Joseph's new rice plantation. Uncle Joseph is having the plantation built along the banks of Cooper River, about 20 miles from Charleston. Much of the land in the new plantation is a tidal marsh. The land is a perfect place to grow rice. That is because rice needs a lot of water, but it is not a healthy place to live. Many people at the plantation get sick and die. Even those who do not get sick are constantly swatting at mosquitoes. They do not know that the mosquitoes spread a deadly disease called malaria. So a lot of them would get really sick from those conditions. A marsh is a wet, hot climate, and you can't really fight off diseases there. Well, and it's just a very unhealthy place to live. Not only uncomfortable, but you're more likely to get diseases. Now, the long, hot, humid summer months at the plantation are the worst. So every summer, Uncle Joseph's family lives in Charleston. So they move over to Charleston, but the enslaved workers are not allowed to leave. It's only the people who own the plantation who do that. It's a little cooler in Charleston because of breezes from the harbor. People also think they're safer from diseases there. Now, Uncle Joseph owns many enslaved workers who had once been rice farmers in Africa. The enslaved workers are digging ditches that will bring water to the rice plants. They are already skilled at that, and they can transfer over that information to really do well with that plantation. But they have to be careful, for there are many poisonous snakes hiding in the marshes. The enslaved workers are also working in the fields. The carriage nears the center of the plantation. Eliza sees more enslaved people hard at work. They are building a long driveway leading to the main house. Now, many buildings stand behind the trees that line the driveway. Eliza recognizes the sounds coming from the blacksmith's workshop and the horse stable near the carriage house. A short distance away, soap and candle makers and shoemakers are busy at work. Eliza can see carpenters, gardeners, and stable boys. It takes the hard work of many people to keep the plantation running. I visited a plantation in Charleston about a year and a half ago, And they have all these places set up where you can see all of the different people that are there working together to make that plantation run well. So it was a lot of people working together. Sadly, a lot of these people were not paid, and they gave them really small and really sad places to live. At our school, when you reach 5th grade, if you stay with us, you'll be reading a book called Frederick Douglass, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, where a man who had been an enslaved worker learns how to read and write and became a very influential, wonderful man. And he tells about his story of what growing up was like and his time as an enslaved worker, but then how he overcame that. And it talks, and he wrote it, and he's a wonderful writer and speaker. So if you reach 5th grade, you'll hear a lot more about what life was like for people at the time. Well, that's the end of it. Chapter 8, Story of Georgia, a colony that also had a lot of these cash crops and big plantations. So we'll get into that tomorrow. Okay, that is the story of the Carolinas, the colony of North and South Carolina, but specifically focusing on South Carolina in that chapter. I will talk to you all later. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and take some notes after you're done with this video. Bye.